Hello and welcome to On the Shelf, a little series of video casts where I explore the books on my shelves, because one or two people told me that might be interesting and one or two people have watched, so sounds like it might be to some people, and it's very interesting to me because in doing this it's helping me rediscover some books. You know, I have lots of books obviously because I love books, and I love what goes in them, and I love underlining things, and I take notes from those books, and it's nice to stumble upon some of those things again by chance and to tell you about them. So we have a clutch of books this week. Let me kind of show you those. That's not very good, is it? Because they're all white. But I'll go through them one at a time. So here they are. There's some heavyweights in here as well. Jean-Paul Sartre appeared at the bottom there. So yeah, 6 of them. And actually, you know, these are a good clutch of books. Although there's, you know, some of them appear and I think, why are they next to that book? Which is quite interesting, but I must have been looking at them at some point. The first one is this one. This is a book called Kindly Inquisitors by Jonathan Rauch. The New Attacks on Free Thought. I'll read you a little bit off the back actually, and before I delve into it. A liberal society, he says, a liberal society stands on the proposition that we should all take seriously the idea that we might be wrong. This means we must place no one, including ourselves, beyond the reach of criticism. It means that we must allow people to err even where the error offends and upsets, as it often will. And I think that's really interesting. I think we live in an age now where people talk about being offended very easily. That offends me, this offends me. And Rauch has a whole book here where he talks about just that and just those things. And he says, you know, a very dangerous principle is now being established as a social right. Thou shalt not hurt others with words. This principle is a menace, he says, and I think the point he's making is that we have to be able to say things sometimes in order to reveal them so that they can be explored. He says, he makes the point in the book, and again I'm saying this having read it and not knowing how I feel about some of these things sometimes. He says, you know, there has to be people who say things that might be perceived as racist or sexist or homophobic, because those things need to be revealed so that we can enter into a productive debate about those opinions. And he makes the point that if people don't get the chance to express those views, we never get the chance to overturn the ones that are discriminatory and disadvantage people, which is quite interesting, I think. And when people feel as though they can't express themselves, they go underground, don't they? Or they coalesce into groups, and we've seen some of that recently, haven't we? I suppose. And he talks about principles that might be contenders for how we go about figuring out what is legitimate. He talks about the fundamental principle, those who know the truth should decide who is right, and makes the point, go back to Plato. This was kind of an idea of Plato's, that there are the great and the good who know better than other people, and they should get to decide. Well, obviously I'm going to disagree with that, I'm sure you do. Then the simple egalitarian principle, all sincere persons' beliefs have equal claims to respect. Well, I read that and I think, well, I can see why he's arguing that we should hear these views, but I don't respect the view of somebody who says something that's racist or homophobic. I don't respect that view, and I don't think I should have to. So just because they're sincere in their belief doesn't mean I should respect it. Then he talks about the radical egalitarian principle, which is the same as the simple egalitarian principle, but says that beliefs of persons in historically oppressed classes or groups get special consideration. Well, yes, to a point. I think people who've been denied a voice should get a voice, should absolutely have a voice. But should those opinions and views be privileged over other views, or is that not just the same problem reimagined? I don't know. And then the humanitarian principle, he talks about any of the above principles, he says, but with the condition that the first priority be to cause no hurt. And what he says is we're going to say things to each other that people will perceive as hurtful, because that's the nature of dialogue and debate. I may not agree with you, doesn't mean I don't like you, doesn't mean I hate you, doesn't mean that what I say might not hurt you in some way. But if we're going to have an honest debate, he suggests, then we have to be able to say the things that are on our minds and then articulate them, because he says the liberal principle is checking of each by each through public criticism. And he says this is the only legitimate way to decide who is right. To get it out there, to debate it clearly, pragmatically, looking at the objective evidence, thinking about that, and then check it with each other. Check it out. Now, in massive societies like we live in today, that's probably quite difficult, I suppose, because there was such a range of debates. But it was a really interesting read, Kindly Inquisitors by Jonathan Rauch. And then a book that I bought around about exactly the same time, Neil Postman's Amusing Ourselves to Death. There it is. So all the light from the window makes some of these light books hard to spot. This is a book about the impact on the formation of knowledge of television. So he's writing it in, let me check, 1985, I think. Yep, 1985, first published in Great Britain, 1986. So he's writing this in the 1980s, and he's talking about the advent of television. He actually goes all the way back to the printing press and talks about the impact that the printing press had, and then he's talking about the impact that television has when that's invented and it becomes kind of available for public consumption. And it's not a great leap to take what he says and apply it to the emergence of the internet and social media. So it's a really interesting book. It's a book that I haven't finished yet. I got about 2/3 of the way through it. I still need to kind of finish off the last bit. And what I liked about it was he talks about reading, and I think reading is a much better way to find out about stuff than watching telly. Although I'm a fan of a documentary and I'm a fan of a TED talk and the like. But he says this: reading is by its nature a serious business. It is also, of course, an essentially rational activity. Almost every scholar who has grappled with the question of what reading does to one's habits of mind has concluded that the process encourages rationality, that the sequential, propositional character of the written word fosters analytic management of knowledge. He talks about the fact there's something about a book. When somebody writes a book, and I've written one, you have to sit down and think about what you want to say. Whereas when I'm talking here, I'm not really kind of thinking through the next words. I'm just going with whatever I feel is right to say in this moment. And that's fine, that has value and that has a place, doesn't it? But what he says is, what Postman is saying is, when somebody sits down to write a book, they take all of that knowledge, bring it together, work with it, hone it, to come up with their definitive rather than off the cuff impression that they want to get across. So the written word, I'd argue, is always going to trump other versions of knowledge creation. Neil Postman, Amusing Ourselves to Death. The next one, again it's white so it might reflect, is this one, Authentic Happiness by Martin Seligman. So we've got a couple now. That's a couple of kind of theory type ones, kind of why is the world the way it is, how do we construct knowledge, and this one and the next one are kind of about the thing that interests me, which is self-care or being the best version of ourselves, or being happy, or being content. So Martin Seligman is the father of positive psychology. So Martin Seligman came along and said, psychology is very negative. We wait till people have problems, then we try and resolve or help people resolve those problems. And he said, what we need to do is figure out how it is that some people don't become unwell psychologically in the first place, and then get people to do that so they never become unwell. So positive psychology, here's what affects your psychology in a positive way. And he says lots of interesting stuff. I've just picked a couple of little things out here. Positive emotion alienated from the exercise of character leads to emptiness. He's a big fan on establishing your character. What is it about? What is it about your character? He talks about a time that we live in a world where your character is not as important now as what you project externally. And he says we've got a problem there because your character is everything. So positive emotion alienated from the exercise of character leads to emptiness, to inauthenticity, to depression, and, as we age, to the gnawing realization that we are fidgeting until we die. Harsh, but there you go. And I love this. Just as the good life is something beyond the pleasant life, the meaningful life is beyond the good life. So just living a good life, having the things around you that you want, being comfortable and content, I suppose he's saying, is not enough. We need to lead a meaningful life. And that takes me back, doesn't it, to an earlier episode where we talked about Viktor Frankl's idea, of giving meaning to life, and that being important in terms of being happy and content. And the next one is this book here, which is Flow, and by this guy here called Mihaly, Csikszentmihalyi. Now, over the length of time that I've been referencing this book and flicking through it and doing all sorts of things with it, my pronunciation of his name has moved, because I don't think I've ever heard anybody pronounce his name. I've read his name and I've seen somebody break it down into the phonetics and stuff, and I'm still not convinced I'm saying it right. But there you go. You know what I mean? It's this guy. And this was the starting point, I think, for a lot of my interest in the concept of workflow, life flow. How do we manage transitions from thing to thing? How do we get into our deep work tunnels? That kind of thing. I've got a few underlines here. I'm trying to figure out which one I decided to read. Let's go with this one. When we follow the suggestions of genetic and social instructions without question, we relinquish the control of consciousness and become helpless playthings of impersonal forces. The person who cannot resist food or alcohol and whose mind is constantly focused on sex is not free to direct his or her psychic energy. So we have to somehow kind of, in any particular moment, find a way to be that is not, I think what he's getting at there is just not rooted in our biology. We have to apply ourselves to things. The solution is to gradually become free of societal rewards and learn how to substitute for them rewards. I've misread that. The solution is to gradually become free of societal rewards and learn how to substitute for them rewards that are under one's own powers. So what we have to do is control it, or it will control you. David Allen. So that's the classic text on flow. Then I've got this. Hey. John Kennedy Toole, A Confederacy of Dunces. This is not the best language for a title, I suppose, these days. It's a book from a good while back. It won the 1981 Pulitzer Prize for fiction. So it's about 40 years old, and it tells it's the first. Is this the first book we've come across that's actually fictional? I think it might be. It's the first one I pulled off my shelf that's a work of fiction, because there's not much on there that's fiction. It's a book by John Kennedy Toole that tells the story of quirky and unusual characters living in New Orleans. And the reason it's on my shelf, and the reason I'm actually reading this at the moment, I started it over the summer. I dipped back out because I had other things to read, but I'm going to pick it back up again because I just pulled it off the shelf for this. Is that it's Billy Connolly's favourite book, or one of Billy Connolly's favourite books, I suppose. And he mentioned it in an interview, and I thought I need to read that, and I can see why it would appeal to him, because the characters are very, very lively, very unusual, and so that's interesting. John Kennedy Toole, A Confederacy of Dunces. And then this one, finally, the Enigma, who is Jean-Paul Sartre. Existentialism is a humanism. He's probably one of my favourite philosophers. And there's loads underlined in this book. The first effect of existentialism is to make every man conscious of what he is and make him solely responsible for his own existence. Sartre is very much here anyway about self-responsibility. Man is not only that which he conceives himself to be, but that which he wills himself to be. And since he conceives of himself only after he exists, just as he wills himself to be after being thrown into existence, man is nothing more. Man is nothing other than what he makes of himself. Obviously, we can replace man for person there, can't we? I have acknowledged, he says, that existence precedes essence, and that man is a free being who under any circumstances can only ever will his freedom. I have at the same time acknowledged that I must will the freedom of others. I have acknowledged that existence precedes essence. I think one of the examples I read about that is it's interesting because an architect would draw a plan of a building, and the essence of the building is captured in that plan, and then the building becomes a reality, whereas it's different for us. We become a reality, and there is nothing to us until we will our self into existence through what we do. I think that's really interesting. So there you go. Kindly Inquisitors, Jonathan Rauch, Neil Postman, Amusing Ourselves to Death, Authentic Happiness by Martin Seligman, Flow by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, John Kennedy Toole, A Confederacy of Dunces, and Jean-Paul Sartre's classic Existentialism is a humanism. There you are, buy a few of them, have a read, see what you think, and I'll catch you next time.